Welcome to Paranormal Mysteries, and thank you all for tuning in. And before we start, I'd like to say thank you to Nicole, Dougie, Tim, Brannon, and Anissa. Your support and generosity are greatly appreciated. If you're interested in supporting us, please consider sharing, reviewing, and subscribing to the show. And if you'd like to take the next step, please visit us at patreon.com/paranormalmysteries or at buymeacoffee.com/paranormal, where you can make a one-time donation. Your support in any form makes the show possible. And if you've encountered the paranormal and you'd like to share your story, please visit me at paranormalmysteriespodcast@gmail.com. All experiences, no matter how big or small, are always welcome. My name is Nick Ryan, and I believe in the paranormal. I've spent most of my life researching the unknown, collecting extraordinary stories, and searching for explanations to some of the most bizarre phenomena imaginable. Now, I'd like to take you on a journey that leads down a darker and less traveled path into the unexplained, the supernatural, and the downright terrifying, as we take a look at the strangest reports from around the world, and quite possibly your very own hometown. So whether you're at home, at work, or on the road, please join me as we begin this episode of the Paranormal Mysteries Podcast. Welcome to the show once again, and as always, I am your host, Nick Ryan. I find all aspects of the paranormal fascinating, but there's something about the possibility of undocumented flesh and blood creatures lurking in the forests that absolutely intrigues me. And tonight, I'm going to be taking a look at several eyewitness reports, some of which are fairly well known, and others that are less popular, but just as unsettling. These reports were curated within 2 articles on Mysterious Universe, the first of which focuses on sightings and encounters that have been reported by law enforcement. And the article says this: among the various supposed witnesses of the giant hairy man are accounts from people of all walks of life. There truly is a vast spectrum of sightings that run the range of locales and witnesses, some which are intriguing, and some which are bordering on the absurd. Yet, one type of report that always catches the attention are those made by the men and women of law enforcement. After all, these trained professionals are usually not out looking for the strange or hairy ape men, so when they come forward with their own accounts, people tend to listen. Here is a selection of odd encounters with police officers in which they came across something for which their experience and training did not prepare them for. A very well-known Bigfoot report by a police officer that made a lot of waves in its time occurred in August of 1976 in the rural area of Whitehall, New York. On this day, Officer Brian Gosselin was driving the outskirts of town along a lonely stretch called Bear Road when he saw a massive hairy man-like creature with red eyes lumbering out of the woods about 30 feet in front of him. Gosselin would describe it as standing 7 or 8 feet tall and weighing at least 400 pounds. And he was also so alarmed by what he was seeing that he reportedly got out of his patrol car to train his spotlight and firearm on it, yet found himself unable to shoot. The strange beast, caught in the beam of the spotlight, then issued an unearthly shriek before barreling off into the trees, leaving behind giant footprints in a nearby field. Over the next few days, other officers would also apparently see the creature, and even Gosselin's father and brother would see it as well. Gosselin would eventually write of his surreal experience in his 2018 book, Bear Road: The True Story. This would not be the end of the strangeness in Whitehall, because in February of 1982, another police officer in the area by the name of Dan Gordon and his partner had their own encounter. The two had been on duty patrolling on Route 22, half a mile from East Bay, at the base of Lake Champlain, when an 8-foot-tall ape-like creature ran across the road to go and climb right up a steep embankment to disappear into the brush. The creature was described as being a little different from a typical Bigfoot, in that it was long, lanky, and had narrow shoulders rather than bulging muscles, and further details said that it slouched heavily, that it had long, thin, gangly arms, and that it was remarkably fast and agile, beyond any human. Gordon allegedly got out of the car to try and pursue the creature, as the other officer sat frozen and terrified in the car, but the beast was already long gone. The two would keep their experience to themselves for years, only going public with it in 2003, after which Gordon was interviewed about it extensively in news stories and TV programs, including Monster Quest and Mysterious Encounters, and the report appeared in the book Bigfoot Encounters in New York and New England. Gordon was described as an incredibly honest and trustworthy man, and insisted on the veracity of what he saw, right up to his death in 2014. Although these reports that have perhaps been most covered in the news and discussed by cryptozoologists, there are actually many other such accounts given under oath by trained police personnel. From the Bigfoot Field Researchers Organization archives comes a report from 1970 in Jefferson Parish, Louisiana. In spring of that year, 2 police officers were called out to a home in the town of Marrero at approximately 9 p.m. on a report of a prowler from a terrified homeowner. The officers arrived at the scene and questioned the female homeowner, and then did a perimeter sweep of the area, even calling in a canine unit. As soon as the dog arrived, it apparently went absolutely nuts, acting very agitated and seemingly scared of something and cowering. The officers circled around the darkened house with guns drawn, now convinced that there was a trespasser lurking about the property. But what they saw was beyond anything either of them had expected. As they rounded the edge of the house, they apparently came to a dark form huddled against the side of the building as if it was hiding, but it was hulking in size, and when it moved, they could see that it was not human in its massive proportions. The creature was reported by officers as being at least 8 feet in height, very wide, and taking long strides out to the street, where it passed under a street light, and they could see that it was covered in dark brown hair. They apparently got a very good look at it in the light, after which it bolted towards a wooded marshy area near a canal, and it vanished. When interviewed by the BFRO investigator, the witness would say this: "The incident with the entity was officially reported in the record system of that jurisdiction. I remembered that we did not emphasize the subject beyond describing it as very tall and dark in color, with no specific description of any clothing, etc. Because it wasn't wearing any clothes, and as I told you, in those days I had no idea what I was looking at, our superiors knew from us verbally what we had seen, and then it was dropped. We handled many unexplained incidences, as do police agencies now. The public just never hears about them. This is what I mentioned to you about me going back 7 years later and not finding the reports. My partner died when he was just 37 years old, so we never had a chance to speak about anything again before he checked out. He was a quiet, no-nonsense guy who wasn't comfortable talking about a lot of the incidents that we handled, including other unexplained incidents." Another rather intriguing account from more modern years was reported on the North American Wood Ape Conservancy from an off-duty police officer who had a rather strange sighting in the area of Liberty County, Texas. He was traveling at night along Farm to Market Highway 1008, north of Kennefic, and right behind a big rig truck when a fleeting movement from the side of the road caught his attention, and he says this of his report: "I was traveling northbound on FM 1008, and there was an 18-wheel truck in front of me at the time, and we were traveling at approximately 55 miles per hour. I observed a large creature in an upright position run out of the tree line on the east side of the highway. It ran in front of the big truck in front of me. The truck braked and swerved to the east side of the road, and the creature was unharmed and cleared the road and ran into the tree line on the west side of FM 1008. From what I could see, this creature appeared to be as tall as the cab of the 18-wheeler, maybe 8 feet, and was bulky and covered in hair. I estimated the speed at which it was running to be around 35 miles per hour, with extremely long strides. There are other police and fire service members in the Kennefic area that have seen this creature, and I have personally heard numerous stories and sightings. If I had not seen it firsthand, I would not have believed it myself." Investigator Daryl Coyler would do an in-depth follow-up interview on this case with the same witness, and would uncover some further details, of which he says this. It was the witness's perception that the figure was tall and covered with grayish hair. The witness was certain that the figure was a biped and moved extremely fast, perhaps 30 to 35 miles per hour. The witness could not recall much in the way of detail, as the event was estimated to have lasted only a few seconds. The witness was impressed by the height of the figure. Using the cab of the 18-wheeler as a gauge, the witness estimated the subject's height to be possibly as much as 8 feet. Because of the figure's speed, overall size and height, and the fact that the subject nearly collided with the 18-wheeler, the witness categorically ruled out the possibility of a hoax. In retrospect, the witness wishes that he had slowed down or even stopped to get a closer or better look. He also wishes that he had flagged the big rig down somehow to get the truck driver's perspective. However, the witness told me that what he saw greatly intimidated him, and at the time he had absolutely no plans for stopping. He carried a .45 semi-automatic handgun with him, but the sidearm gave him little or no security after having witnessed such an incident. From the following year, we have a report from 2003 from a Toronto police officer who had a very strange encounter while off-duty moose hunting near the small town of Searchmount in Ontario, Canada. In October of 2003, the witness was with his brother-in-law, and they had just finished putting out moose bait and issuing moose calls to draw their prey in at around 8 a.m., and one of the animals did make an appearance, but displayed atypical behavior, as if spooked by something. Indeed, the large bull moose ran off in apparent fear. He called his brother, and they went to go see if they could track the animal or draw it back in. The witness sprayed some moose-in-heat urine around to lure the animal back in, and sat back waiting for something to happen. At around 1:30 p.m., something certainly did, but this time, it was no moose. The witness says this. At about 1:30 p.m., I started hearing heavy thumps behind me every now and then. Every time I heard one, I would turn around, but there was nothing there. I should mention that it was still raining. The sound of the rain hitting the ground or the leaves was quite loud, but these thumps were much louder. They sounded like a stone or something heavy hitting the ground, but every time I turned around, I saw nothing. At about 5:25 p.m., I got off the ATV to stretch my legs and have a smoke. I put my gun on the front bag of my ATV to make sure I had it within reach, and I stood in front of my ATV facing the gully, which was to my rear prior to this. While I was having my smoke, I started hearing the distinct sounds of footsteps coming from the gully, snapping branches and leaves crunching. I kept my eyes on the gully while I reached for my rifle. I thought the bull was coming back, and when I looked into the gully about 40 yards straight in front of me, I saw what I thought was a man walking towards me. He was stooped over and looked like he was having trouble walking in the bush. He grabbed a tree and swung himself around and ducked or dove down behind some thick brush. The total time of this took 3 to 5 seconds, and he disappeared. He looked to me as if he was dressed all in black with a black toque or a balaclava on his head. The reason I thought he was wearing a toque was because his head seemed to be long at the back, like a man wearing a toque. It looked like he was wearing a jacket, and the front of his jacket was open halfway, and I could see a different color of lining showing around the neck area. It looked like it was light gray or almost blue on the chest area, in the shape of a V. I couldn't really say how tall it was, because his legs were behind thick brush, and I could only see about mid-thigh, but I would have guessed at the time that he was anywhere from 5'8" to 6 feet tall. But he was about 40 yards away, but it's hard to judge height or size in the bush when you're not sure of the distance. His arms seemed to be too long for a man, but he was extremely muscular, like a bodybuilder, with the typical V-shaped build. There was definitely no fat on him at all. I could see the different muscle groups on his upper body and arms bulging out, and I could see that it had a washboard stomach. When he grabbed the tree, I saw that he had hands, not paws. He swung around the tree and dove for cover as if trying to hide from me. As I said earlier, it was a dull day and was raining, and he looked wet. He was covered with black or dark brown hair, and it looked like the hair was stuck to him fairly closely because he was wet. What also gave me the bodybuilder impression was that he seemed to have no neck, or he had so much muscle on his shoulders that it gave that appearance. On top of all this, his shoulders were extremely broad. The witness watched this strange figure for a time and also noticed that whatever it was making a raspy, coughing sound as it moved, and that it began issuing a long, hoarse, sad-sounding howl before it disappeared into the wilderness. It was this howl that really got him thinking that he was experiencing something very bizarre, and he says this: "When I first saw it, I thought it was a man, maybe lost in the bush, but my first thought was, why isn't he wearing any orange? And if he's lost, why doesn't he just ask for help?" But the howl made me realize quickly that this was no man. The next thing going through my head was, what the hell was that? That was no moose. It was definitely not a wolf or a bear. It was like nothing I had ever seen in 35 years of hunting. What it looked like to me was a gorilla, or very close to one, but it walked upright, not on all fours. I stood there motionless for almost an hour and a half, waiting to see if it would show itself again. After a while, it started to dawn on me that what I may have just seen was a Bigfoot, and I started to get just a little scared. I normally leave the bush after dark when hunting, but this night I left about an hour prior to make sure I had lots of time. I was going to go back to that area the next day looking for that bull, but I couldn't bring myself to go anywhere near that spot. That's the first time in 35 years I've ever been afraid in the bush. Since then, I have wondered if this thing I saw is what scared the bull away. Like I said earlier, I have seen many moose in the bush and have never seen one run from me like that. Interestingly though, from where the bull ran off to where I saw the creature was only about 50 yards. One other thing, and I don't know if this means anything or not, but where I was sitting, I saw a large, probably moose leg bone about 5 feet from my ATV. It wasn't cut or sawed. It had been broken or snapped. It looked to be at least a year old. I was supposed to sit there for the next 3 days to finish the hunt off and wait for that bull, and I didn't want to be there. I've never been that scared in the bush in my life. In 2006, there was a spate of Bigfoot sightings in the vicinity of the Pine Ridge Native American Reservation in South Dakota. People began to call in with numerous reports of seeing a 10 to 15 foot tall brute of a beast stalking about the wilds, with a hunchback, and in some cases, even bizarrely reported as wearing a stovepipe hat. The sightings flooded the reservation's law enforcement agency, the Oglala Sioux Tribe Department of Public Safety. But among these, perhaps the most compelling is a report made by officers at the scene of such an account. The report was made by an officer by the name of James Twiss, who would tell the site Cryptomundo the following. "My name is James Twiss. I'm a police officer on the Pine Ridge Reservation. I am passing on information regarding the rash of sightings of a tall man or Bigfoot on the Pine Ridge Reservation. During one of these sightings, I had our department's thermal imaging camera, and along with about 6 other officers, did in fact pick up a large heat signature on the camera. Unfortunately, we do not have a recorder yet for the camera, so we weren't able to record it. We did watch as it moved away from us down a gully, and it was missed by the other officers as they tried to find it using their flashlights. It is hard to explain, as it must have already been past the other officers before they arrived on scene. We watched it go into the creek area, which runs through town. We heard a flurry of dogs barking, but wasn't able to locate it. Also, to set the record straight, the first 2 sightings were called in as a 10 to 15 foot tall man who appeared to be wearing a stovepipe hat and long coat. It was reported to be peeking into an apartment complex common room, where there were several witnesses. In 2015, there was a curious report making the rounds from a police officer in the state of Pennsylvania. According to a report on the site Crypto Sightings, a police officer in McDade Park in Lackawanna County, Pennsylvania, said he was out on patrol when he noticed a looming dark shape leaning over the roadway with a large, hairy section including a big hairy wrist and an extremely muscular leg. The officer, who claims he is an 18-year veteran of the force, says this of his outlandish encounter. "I was driving on patrol toward McDade Park in Scranton, PA. It was late at night, and I was just checking the park, making sure that all was okay, and I just noticed a very dark object leaning over the edge of the road near the pool as I drove past. I passed extremely close to the object, close enough to feel shocked to see a large hairy section of well-muscled leg and a big hairy wrist and hand. As the creature turned, I screamed and grabbed my cell to snap a picture, as well as my gun. I slammed on the brakes and I was ready to shoot. I just had to see what the hell it was. I wanted to see the entire thing for myself, but what can I say? Whatever it was either a huge monkey or a Bigfoot. I am not going public with this because it would cost me my job. There is something in that park, and I've heard stories of something roaming the park late at night. Interestingly, there is another police officer report from Pennsylvania in August of 2017, who on this evening was driving along a road in a wooded location in a southwestern section of Westmoreland County, PA, when he had a rather bonkers close encounter. As he made his way through the gloom of this remote place, he says he noticed the odd detail of a silvery sheen of light which was low to the ground. As the officer approached, he then came to the startling realization that the light was emanating from a ball of light that seemed to be the head of a Bigfoot-like creature. Researcher Stan Gordon would investigate this, and says this of the off-the-wall account. The ball of light was actually the head of a very strange being that looked to be about 6 feet tall or larger. It was tall and almost skeleton thin. The officer was of the opinion that the creature, when he first observed it, had been lying on its belly on the ground, with its head facing toward the road. It then stood up, facing the road. In that dark location, he saw the dull light from the glowing head illuminating the upper section of the body of the creature. While the officer watched, the creature turned to the right. The dull illumination from the head lit up the shoulder area. The creature then turned and faced him, then turned to the left and took off at an incredible speed toward a location away from the road. As it moved off, the witness could see its arms swinging. The officer indicated that it took off at a speed that you could only call abnormal. It was faster than anything I have ever seen. It was there, then it was gone. The witness assumed that the creature moved on 2 legs, however he could not see the lower sections of the body in the dark. The witness described what he saw as standing 6 feet or taller. The head was about 8 to 10 inches in diameter and shaped like a ball. He said the head was just a ball of light, possibly egg-shaped, but pretty round. The light emitted seemed to be just a dull white. The light illuminated the shoulders, the top of the chest, and a section of the arms. The witness could not see the hands. The chest looked to be about 18 inches across. The waist appeared to be small, but the arms were abnormally long. The long limbs also looked skeletal with no muscle mass. The skin tone of the body appeared to be a dull grayish blue. The witness could not see any facial features, and the entire experience only lasted about 18 seconds. The officer was confused as to what he saw, and about what could move so fast. He pulled the vehicle up to where the creature had been standing, and turned on his vehicle spotlight. He looked around the area, but saw no evidence on the ground. The officer, after the experience, continued to try to make sense out of what he had encountered, but he could not figure it out. I was contacted after the incident, and we later discussed the incident in detail. Finally, we have the report from the BFRO that allegedly happened as recently as July of 2019 in the state of Wisconsin. The witness is apparently a respected retired law enforcement veteran and was out driving with his brother and sister near Tripoli, Wisconsin, when they had a brush with the truly bizarre. The witness says this: "The day was clear and cool. We were traveling approximately 10 to 15 miles per hour in a Chevy Suburban. I was looking out across the clearing when I saw a large, reddish-brown upright figure running along the edge of the trees in the distance. It was too large to be a deer, and it didn't have the proper height or gait to be a bear. It had no muzzle or neck, and the smaller trees moved aside, like it was pushing its way into the woods." While this next article remains focused on the topic of Bigfoot, it takes a closer look at some of the more violent experiences that have been submitted by eyewitnesses over the years, and it's a disturbing glimpse of what these creatures are capable of, if they are in fact real. The article says, "Perhaps the most widely known and publicized case of an attack on humans from an alleged Bigfoot occurred in the summer of 1924, when 5 prospectors by the names of Marion Smith, his son Roy Smith, Fred Beck, Gabe Lefevre, and John Peterson were out in the wilds of Mount St. Helens in Skamania County, Washington. The group was out in the remote wilderness, working on a claim in an area of a branch of the Lewis River, about 8 miles from Spirit Lake, when they came across their first of many oddities to come. There, embedded into the earth, was a series of footprints, reported as looking very human-like, but much more massive, at around 14 inches in length, and with unusually stubby toes. Not long after this, the men began to see some strange 7-foot-tall gorilla-like creature through the trees during their trek, which was described as being covered in long black hair and sporting 2 4-inch-long ears that stuck straight up, which is an odd detail to say the least. At one point, one of the spooked prospectors, Marion Smith, fired at it to send it lumbering off, but far from cowering, this seemed to only make the creature even bolder. On the morning of July 10th, Beck purportedly sighted the creature standing some distance away near the edge of a canyon and decided to try to take a shot at it. He apparently managed to score a hit, and the bizarre figure apparently staggered and fell right over the edge of the canyon, plummeting 400 feet down, presumably to its death. It was perhaps this incident that would be the catalyst for what came next. Later that evening, the men were relaxing in the camp in the cabin they had built when they were startled by a sudden urgent pounding on the roof that seemed to shake the whole structure. The prospectors were immediately on the alert and grabbed their rifles, still wondering just what was going on. In addition to this pounding and thudding, the cabin began to be pelted by large rocks, some of which broke off pieces of the building or came careening straight through the windows and roof, and at least one of which struck Beck to purportedly knock him unconscious. According to news stories at the time, there were dozens of the creatures prowling about outside of the cabin, and Beck would later claim that the men had fired wildly out into the night in all directions, and even up to the roof in a panicked, desperate attempt to drive the menacing creatures off. According to him, the fight lasted all night, and they cowered in their cabins shooting at the monstrous hairy intruders that were assaulting them from out in the night, which they called the Mountain Devils. And it was not until the coming of morning that they were finally able to escape, leaving their cabin, equipment, and potentially a very valuable claim behind. As soon as the story was out, the area came to be widely known as Ape Canyon, and natives of the area suggested that the men had come across a tribe of 7 to 8 foot tall hairy wildmen with supernatural powers, who they called the Siatik. According to these tribal sources, members of this lost tribe were typically shy and hardly ever seen, but would exact great vengeance on anyone who killed one of their own. Not only is this one of the earliest reports of Bigfoot violence, but it is the report that really got people interested in the phenomenon of massive hairy ape men in North America, and the report really got people's imaginations going at the time. The story of the Ape Canyon Bigfoot attack has become a major part of Bigfoot lore ever since, but as dramatic and exciting as it is, there are some inconsistencies to be found in later reports and retellings. For instance, in the original report of the attack, it was stated that the creature had been shot off the cliff and had been killed the day before the attack, yet Beck would in later years insist that it had been killed the morning after the attack. The size of the footprints they had found also went up from an already impressive 14 inches all the way up to a staggering 19 inches in length. And Beck would claim that the original creature that had been shot at had been hit in the head 3 times by Smith, yet had been totally unfazed. The attack itself later also underwent an evolution from a brief shootout to a prolonged all-night siege and attack, with the creatures trying to smash their way in and even reaching in through holes in the walls to try and grab the terrified men within. In short, the story has gotten more and more exciting and action-packed over the years, and while this may just be down to Beck's ailing memory in later years, it seems to sensationalize and spice up the story, and makes any truth that much harder to glean from it. Interestingly though, one of the people who interviewed Beck about his experiences in later years was none other than Roger Patterson, the man who managed to film the most famous piece of Bigfoot footage of all time, in October of 1967, and who published the interview in a 1966 book called Do Abominable Snowmen of America Really Exist? Indeed, it is said that the whole over-the-top account given by Beck was one of the reasons Patterson and his partner Bob Gimlin had developed so much interest in the creatures to begin with, and why they had ended up out there at Bluff Creek looking for Bigfoot. The Ape Canyon story will likely remain cloaked in mystery, and we'll probably never know just how much of what was reported actually happened, and how much is fiction. There is unfortunately not much evidence to go on other than Beck's account, and even the location of the attack, the cabin, was supposedly destroyed in a fire in 1968, according to Beck, and by other accounts wiped out in the 1980 eruption of Mount St. Helens. The exact location of the mysterious cabin continues to be searched for to this day, with some even claiming to have found it. The body of the creature that Beck allegedly shot to send sprawling down to its doom on the rocks below was also never recovered. Due to this lack of evidence and any way to corroborate the events depicted, it seems that we are left to merely speculate and discuss the far-out tale of Ape Canyon. In a bizarre twist that may or may not have anything to do with Beck's story, in May of 1950, a mountaineer and skier by the name of Jim Carter suddenly and mysteriously disappeared in Ape Canyon while out on a climbing expedition with 20 other people on a warm, clear day. A subsequent search would turn up footprints that seemed to suggest that the missing man had been frantically running as if being chased, even careening down steep embankments and hurtling recklessly across crevices. One searcher, a mountaineer and member of the Seattle Mountain Search and Rescue Unit, Bob Lee, has said that there was a constant sense of being watched from the woods during the search. He would say this of the expedition: "It was the most eerie experience I have ever had. There was something strange on the high slopes of the mountain. I could feel the hair on my neck standing up. It was eerie. I was unarmed except for my ice axe, and believe me, I never let go of it." Carter's complete disappearance is an unsolved mystery to this day. Dr. Otto Trott, Lee Stark, and I finally came to the conclusion that the mountain devils got him. After a 2-week search by nearly 100 rescuers, no signs of Carter, other than that strange evidence of his mad dash down the mountain, were ever found. Lee would go on to say that he was dead serious when he said that the mountain devils got him, and claimed there had been 25 reports of people being harassed or attacked by ape-like creatures at Mount St. Helens over a period of 20 years, including a pack of visiting Boy Scouts along with a scoutmaster, who were unharmed but supposedly scared out of their wits after being charged by one of the furious beasts. It seems that whatever they are, the ape men of Ape Canyon do not appreciate human trespassers. The original Beck account from Ape Canyon may be one of the older stories of aggressive Bigfoot, but there are actually even older accounts as well. In February of 1829, there were reports in several newspapers, such as the February 9th edition of The Statesman and the Connecticut Sentinel, of an apparent attack by a hairy giant in the Okefenokee Swamp of the U.S. state of Georgia. 2 men had apparently ventured out into the swamp to explore, bringing along with them a young boy. At some point, they found strange prints measuring 8 inches long and 9 inches wide, out into the deeper parts of the swamp, and they made their way back home after being spooked by the enormous footprints. Some local hunters then became interested in the tale, and one of the men who had seen the footprints accompanied them back out to the site where he had found them. They did indeed find some vestiges of tracks, and apparently followed them deeper into the wilderness for several days. One evening, while the group was in camp, they reportedly had a harrowing experience when some fierce creature charged them from the brush. 5 men and the creature itself would end up dead in the ensuing battle, and the Statesman news report says this: "The next minute he was in their full view, advancing upon them with a terrible look and a ferocious mien. Our little band instinctively gathered close in a body and presented their rifles. The huge being, nothing daunted, bounded upon his victims, and in the same instant received the contents of 7 rifles. He did not fall alone, nor until he had glutted his wrath with the death of 5 of them, which he effected by wringing the heads from the bodies. Writhing and exhausted, at length he fell, with his hapless prey beneath his grasp. When the dead beast's carcass was examined, it was found to measure 13 feet tall, and was covered with coarse hair, and the frightened men decided to retreat, as they were afraid its death would attract any others in the area. So hasty was their escape that both the mysterious monster and their fallen partners were left where they lay." Whether this incident really happened or not, the Okefenokee Swamp has long produced stories of such creatures from the native tribes, and sightings and reports of Bigfoot-like beasts, all the way up to present day. Another early report was uncovered by cryptozoologist Loren Coleman. The report comes from an article called "Terror in the Woods," which appeared in the November 27, 1895 edition of the San Francisco newspaper The Call, and is a rather dramatic and violent account of several lumbermen who either went missing or were killed in a shockingly brutal manner by some wild beast in Northern California. The story goes that in November of 1895, a lumberman came out of the wilderness, telling stories of missing men and a hairy wild man running amok. The article says, "A lumberman who returned today from the forest in the north of the state brings the most harrowing intelligence of the doings of a wild man in the lumber region of the West Branch. He states that great consternation has been caused and a large number of lumbermen have left the camps and returned to their cities rather than face the monster. For over 2 months, quite a number of men have disappeared from the camps, and when found, bore the semblance of having an encounter with some wild animal. Their bodies in every instance have been terribly mangled and torn. A lumberman who returned to a camp a little north of this city a week ago startled all by stating that while at work he had been attacked by this wild man, and it was only by the help of his axe that he had been able to defend himself from the murderous attacks. Since that time he has been seen by the crews several times, but on their approach he fled into the deep woods with the speed of a deer. He is described as being so nearly like an animal that it is almost impossible to detect him from one. He has a long shaggy beard and is covered with a huge skin coat. The general belief is that he is a sportsman who has become lost in the deep forests, and after wandering around for weeks, has gone hopelessly crazy. And already there have been over 6 instances of a similar character in the state." Another early report was published in 1892 in a book written by none other than the former president and rugged outdoorsman, Theodore Roosevelt himself, called The Wilderness Hunter. In one entry in the book, Roosevelt describes the frightening encounter of a frontiersman, referred to only as Bauman, who was allegedly out with a partner in an isolated area of Montana's Wisdom River to do some trapping. The men made a makeshift camp and went out to trap, and when they returned, found that not only had their packs been ripped open and rummaged through while they were away, but that their lean-to had also been destroyed. The men, perhaps foolishly, decided to stay and merely rebuilt the lean-to and tidied up the camp, and that night, Bauman supposedly was awoken by something crashing through the brush and an oppressive foul stink. Bauman grabbed his rifle and shot out into the night, after which the creature reportedly scampered off. The following morning, the men made preparations to leave, deciding that they had had enough of the strange goings-on. Bauman allegedly gathered up their traps while his partner went on ahead to set up a new camp farther down the river. But when Bauman arrived, he was met with the grisly sight of his friend, dead, his neck twisted all the way around, and horrific bite marks on his throat. Although this could have just as easily been a bear attack as a Sasquatch attack, and was probably just meant to be a good yarn, it is a curious account, nevertheless. A very bizarre and much more recent report of an alleged attack happened in 1965 in Monroe County, Michigan, when a 17-year-old Christina Van Acker was driving home one evening with her mother. As they drove, there was reported a loud thud that reverberated through the car and shook the vehicle. Thinking that they had just hit an animal or a person, they stopped the car to take a look. According to the report, as soon as Christina rolled the window down, a massive arm covered in black hair reached in through the window, grabbed her head, and then smashed it against the car door so hard that she was rendered unconscious. It is unclear just how much it had prepared to push this attack, as Christina's mother's screams seemed to have startled it and sent it running off back into the woods. The mother would claim that it was a hair-covered ape-like beast, around 7 feet tall, which had growled like a mad dog. Still more recent yet is a somewhat well-known case that happened in 2000 in a rural part of Honobia, Oklahoma. The witness, known only as Mike, supposedly bought a farm there with his family, and several months after moving in, strange things began to happen. One evening, Mike claims that they started hearing loud bangs on the front door, or even the sides of the house, and in the ensuing days, he claims that he even saw a shadowy figure that stood 8 feet tall, lurking about the property. After this, things got even more harrowing, when 30 chickens went missing from the chicken coop, and a load of deer meat was stolen from the shed, which had a door that had been completely ripped off. In addition to this, on several occasions there were heard unearthly and deafening shrieking wails booming out of the forest at night. Mike asked his brother for some help, and the two men decided to try and set up a stakeout to shoot the intruder with rifles. After several nights of staying awake in the dark and with their rifles held close, A man-like hairy face reportedly bloomed out of the darkness at the window to peer in and growl menacingly, after which the two brothers fired at it to send it fleeing. As the two men ran out onto the porch to pursue it, they saw it fall to the ground apparently dead, and 3 more of the massive beasts allegedly then materialized from the trees to carry away the carcass. The next evening, they apparently came back for revenge, as the brothers reported having their house assaulted by the creatures, which hurled stones, punched walls, and violently rattled doors and windows, all the while howling in anger. And such attacks would persist until the family decided to move. The incident has been commonly referred to as the Siege at Honobia, and has several of the hallmarks of Beck's Ape Canyon encounter, such as the dead Bigfoot inciting fierce vengeance, and the attack on the home by several of the creatures who seem to have really wanted to get in. One wonders what would have happened if they had actually succeeded. For an in-depth look at the events that occurred during the Siege at Honobia, I highly recommend listening to episode 11 of Sasquatch Chronicles. The cases that we discussed tonight barely scratch the surface when it comes to terrifying encounters with what many believe is Bigfoot. In fact, one of my favorite unexplained reports involving Sasquatch occurred in Port Chatham, around the Portlock Cannery, which I covered in episode 48. I also did not cover the Beast of Boggy Creek in this episode, because I feel that it's been covered by so many other sources. But if any of you would like to hear me do a specific episode on the Beast of Boggy Creek, please let me know. As always, I'll be covering more of these strange reports in the future, but for the moment, I'd like to know if any of you have had an encounter with Bigfoot. Whether you've had an actual sighting or have just heard some bizarre vocalizations, I'd like to hear about your experience. If you've witnessed something unexplainable and you'd like to have your story shared on the podcast, please contact me at paranormalmysteriesPodcast@gmail.com or visit us at paranormalmysteriespodcast.com and click on the Tell Your Story link. All of our contact information can be found in the show notes. Until next time, I hope you all have a great beginning to your week, and we'll see you back here on Wednesday with our next episode. From all of us at Paranormal Mysteries, thank you for listening, and remember, don't wait for the unknown to come to you. Get out there and find it.